What is up, everyone? Dylan here from All You Can Board, and today I am going to be teaching you how to play Beez, Beez, the magical fruit. The more you eat, the more you toot. Beans. What is up, everyone? Dylan here from All You Can Board, and today I am going to be teaching you how to play Beez. Now, believe it or not, Beez is the second game with the bee theme that we've looked at this year, the first one being Queens, which either tells you one of three things. The bee theme is here and here to stay. We really like insects, or it's just an absolute coincidence. It's probably the third. But either way, this is a really beautiful game and really great components, and it comes from the publishers of Azul, which is obviously a smash hit. They've borrowed a lot of the aesthetics, a lot of the box look and design from Azul. I'll actually pull it out for you here. You can see there's a lot of similarities. Obviously, it's a completely different game, completely different theme, but just the design of them is very, very similar. There's a lot to love here, and I want to help you get it to the table just a little bit quicker. So sit back, relax, and if you want to be thematically appropriate, grab yourself a cup of tea and pour a little bit of honey in there. Let's jump right into it. To begin setup, each player takes a honeycomb board, a player marker, and a bee with beehive in their matching color. Next, you'll want to build the main flower field board, but I'm not going to go over all those steps here as the rulebook does a really good job of laying them out for you. Just note that it is a different setup with 2 players compared to 3 or 4 players, and you'll find the 2-player setup in the back of the rulebook. After the board is built, you're going to want to populate the flower tiles with nectar. On every flower tile, you're going to place 3 small nectar that match the colored spots on those tiles. So for instance, on this tile, I would place 3 small yellow nectar. Then on every flower tile that's on the edge of the field, that is not connected to the starting tile, you're going to place a large nectar. The color of large nectar that you place is going to depend on the color of the middle spot of that tile. So for instance, on this tile, I would be placing a blue large nectar. Next, you're going to want to sort the objective cards into 3 piles based on the color of their lid. Shuffle each pile separately, and you're going to deal out 1 card from each pile. These will be the common public objectives for the game. Then each player will draw 1 card from each of the piles so that everyone has 3 cards in their hand. You will now pick 2 of these to keep, and these will be your secret private objectives for the game. And that's it, now you're ready to play Beez. So in Beez, players are going to be taking turns that consist of 3 possible phases. The whole point of Beez is you're going to be moving around this board and collecting nectar. And every time you collect nectar, you're going to be moving this little player marker up 1 spot at the top of your honeycomb board. After you've collected 12 nectar, the game is going to end. Everyone has to have the same amount of turns, so you're going to complete that round, but then you're going to go to scoring and the game will be over. So essentially, 12 nectar is the time limit for the game, and everything you do in your turn is just collecting the type of nectar that you want that matters towards your secret private objectives or the public common objectives. So the first phase of your turn is called Flight Plan, and it's pretty simple. Every bee has a honeycomb that they're on, and every side of that honeycomb has a different number or different set of numbers. So for instance, this side has a 1 or 5, this side has a 2 or 4, this side only has a 3, and so on. One side, the side that has the bee's head, is going to have this cross-out symbol here that is saying that you cannot fly in that direction. So what you're going to do is you're going to look at your bee on the board and you're going to choose which direction you want to fly. Now, you're not going to actually fly them in this phase, you're just deciding which direction you want to go, but whichever way you go, you're going to be able to move a certain number of spaces depending on the numbers that are shown on that side of the hexagon. So for instance, if I decided I wanted to move this direction and move 1 or 5 spaces, I would turn my bee and indicate that that's the direction I wish to fly by pointing the bee's head in that direction. That is the extent of this first phase. You don't actually move the bee in this phase, you just turn them and decide your flight plan. Phase 2 is flying and collecting nectar. Now in this phase, you're going to move the indicated number of spaces that you chose during your flight plan phase and collect any nectar that you land on. Now there's a few rules that come into play when you're flying with the bee, so let's go over those now. Your flight must always end on a space in which there are no other bees. Your bee always flies in a straight line, never curved. Your bee may fly over other bees. Your bee must never leave the flower field. If your planned flight would leave your bee on a space with another bee or outside the flower field, you can't carry out the flight. Return to phase 1 and plan a new flight. If your bee cannot make any legal flight, instead fly to any adjacent space regardless of your original planning. If your bee lands on a spot that has a small nectar on it, you can take that small nectar and place it in front of you. If your bee, however, lands on a spot with a large nectar on it, that is the center of the flower, you take that large nectar, but you can also take one small adjacent nectar that's still available. So essentially you get 2 nectar and it speeds up your acquisition of nectar. If your bee lands on the center of a flower that has already had its large nectar claimed, you may still grab one small nectar that is adjacent to that spot. There are some special tiles on the board, and those are water droplet spaces. Now, these are spaces that if your bee lands on, you immediately get to carry out another flight plan, essentially taking another turn. So if you really had to close the gap between 2 really far spaces, you could essentially plan to land on a water droplet spot and then take another turn and make it to where you really wanted to get to. The third and final phase is storing nectar and making honey. Now, you will only take this phase if you collected nectar during phase 2. If your bee ended on an empty space and didn't collect nectar, you will skip phase 3 and it will just pass to the next player clockwise. If, however, you did collect nectar, this is where you will actually take that nectar that is in front of you, place it on your honeycomb board, obviously keeping in mind the public objectives and your secret objectives and what you're trying to accomplish. So let's take a closer look at that now. So each honeycomb has 19 chambers that are arranged in 5 rows, and you'll notice that there's numbers on each of the spots that you can place nectar. These are indicating the possible flight distances you could have taken and therefore which spots you can place your nectar on. The nectar you store must be on an empty chamber, and it must be in a row with a number that corresponds to the flight path you just took. So for instance, if my bee just traveled 4 to 5 spaces, I would be able to place my nectar on either the top or the bottom row. If my bee only traveled 1 space, I could place my nectar on any of the spots in the middle row. Remember that for each nectar you place, you will move your player marker at the top of the board 1 space to the right, and once you have stored 12 nectar, this will be the final round of the game, and then the game will be over. Keep in mind that there are a limited number of chambers for each type of movement. So if you took a 2 to 3 movement with your bee and all the 2 to 3 spots on your honeycomb board were taken, you wouldn't be able to take your nectar, and you would actually have to place it back on the flower that you got it from. If you collected 2 nectar this turn, but you can only place 1 because of capacity issues on your board, place the one that you can and you'll have to put the other one back. If you ever can't store the large nectar that you grabbed, place it back on the flower and just place your bee on top of this nectar. Now, the real fun and magic of this game comes from all the objectives that you're going to be having to score publicly, but also the ones you have in secret. There's a whole variety of different kinds, and that's where it's going to change from game to game what you're doing. I'm not going to go through every single objective card, but just as a couple examples, for instance, the ones I have in my hand are that I have to get 3 in a row of the same color anywhere on my honeycomb board. So I would be trying to move certain distances to be able to place on certain spots on my board and obviously targeting certain colors. Another one I have is that for every white nectar on my board, I'm gonna get 2 honey drops, which is 2 points. So I'm gonna be trying to move around the board and collect as many white nectar, large or small, that I can. There is a handy appendix that comes with the game, and it explains what all the objective cards do and what you should be striving for, so just take some time to familiarize yourself with that. One thing to note is that even though the small and large nectar have different functions when they're on the board, whereas one just gains you the small nectar and the other one gains you the large nectar and the adjacent small nectar, once they're on your honeycomb board, there is no difference in their function. They take up the same kind of spots. Everything works the exact same when they're on the honeycomb board. The only thing that comes into play in that regard is that the large nectar will serve as a tiebreaker if you ever tie in points. So just keep that in mind. Once a player has collected 12 nectar and moved their player piece all the way to the right on their honeycomb board, it's time for scoring. And scoring is pretty simple. You're just going to look at each of the public common objectives that are out and score each one for each player. And they have a handy notepad where you can write that stuff down. And then you're obviously going to score the secret objectives that are in your hand as well. You'll be collecting honey drops, which is what they call points in this game. The person with the most honey drops will win the game. And obviously the tiebreaker, again, is whoever has the most large nectar. And that is how you play Beez. Like I said, it's pretty simple, but there's so much to love here. There are a couple different variants and different setups you can do. So there's some alternate setups that are in the rule book in case you want to change things up for the start of the game from this layout. There's also some expert variants. And again, keep in mind, if you play with 2 players, you do have to do a different setup, but otherwise the rules are the exact same. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope this helped you get this game to the table a little bit quicker. If you did like it, leave us a comment, leave us a like, subscribe to the channel. All that stuff really helps us out and lends support to everything that we're doing. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.